Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well wherever you are in the world. And please remember to continue to stay safe, stay healthy, and stay strong during these times. Now, continuing with my discussion of the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2020, please allow me, if I may, to share with you some thoughts that I have with respect to Criterion's release made on spine number 1022. This is a film from 1991, and this is directed by Barbra Streisand. The film is The Prince of Tides. So this was released in 1991, and it is directed by Barbra Streisand, based of course on the novel by Pat Conroy, The Prince of Tides, and starring Nick Nolte and Barbra Streisand and Blythe Danner and Kate Nelligan and Heroin Krabe and others. This is a film that on the one hand can be said to be a almost traditional Hollywood film, Hollywood drama film from this particular era of cinema history, namely the early 1990s. And there are certain characteristics and certain dramatic constructions in the narrative of the film that I think play along with this kind of interpretation of the film on the one hand. And yet on the other hand, I would suggest that this film does have a number of surprises in terms of how it tries to deal with a very deep character-driven study that is almost borrowing, or not almost, that is, I think, borrowing a lot in terms of analysis and psychoanalysis, also dealing with the ever-changing relationships between and among certain sets of characters, husbands and wives, parents and children, doctor and patient, lovers and lovers. And so I think this kind of tapestry, if you will, and this kind of tapestry of character development and character study, and at the same time set against the context of this novel adaptation, does provide along the way for a number of interesting surprises and interesting turns of the narrative that one might not necessarily expect from an otherwise traditional Hollywood film from this particular era. So I think there is a nice blending or combination of these two different viewpoints or interpretations of this particular work, The Prince of Tides. And I should say also that it is very much a piece that has, of course, a very intricate plot that deals not only with the present, but also with the past, a certain way in which flashbacks are employed, a certain way in which characters in the past also emerge in the present, and the interactions among the particular personages with respect to the past. And indeed, this is a very key element of the plot if you know this film. But this is also a deeply, deeply character-driven film that is fueled, therefore, by the power of the performances. In particular, the power of the performances, I think, by Barbra Streisand as Dr. Lowenstein and Nick Nolte as Tom, which is, I think, one of those really interesting, intricate performances that is very almost volcanic on the one hand, and yet at the same time can be very tender and soft and sweet and very intimate on the other. So this is a very interesting look in terms of acting prowess, acting display in the context of, as I say, a very deep-rooted, character-driven drama from Hollywood during this particular period, which is the early 1990s. So this is The Prince of Tides, again directed by Barbra Streisand. Now, this particular release from the Criterion collection is, as I say, a recent release in 2020, spine number 1022. We have this Blu-ray, which is of the new 4K digital restoration supervised by Barbra Streisand herself. And so we get a film that looks very good and it sounds very good and clear, so it's a really nice presentation of this film. But that is not all. We get a whole bunch of other supplements with this particular release from the Criterion collection, and also we get a booklet or a leaflet, a fold-out with information and also an essay by Bruce Eder. But so that is also very significant, and I will talk about those momentarily. But before I go on, I should mention here something that is very significant, which is that this film does have an interesting connection with the Criterion collection prior to this particular 2020 Blu-ray release. And for those of you who know the laserdiscs, you will know that this film had been a title in the Criterion Collection Laserdisc catalog at spine number 227 of the Laserdisc catalog, which is right here. Sort of a 2-disc set with the film, an audio commentary track, and a ton of supplemental material, and it folded out like this. And so this was the, and I have also here, in case you're interested, the outer packaging, which still had the sticker, the director's edition sticker with the facsimile signature by Barbra Streisand. So this was a laserdisc back in the day, and in used markets one can still find this at, I think, reasonable prices if one is interested. And so there is a nice there's a nice opportunity for comparative analysis, if you will, between what occurred prior to this release. In other words, what occurred with this Laserdisc release back in the day and what is occurring now with this current Blu-ray release. And surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprisingly, and I'll try to get into detail momentarily, there are a lot of carryovers. And in fact, almost 100% of what we find on this Laserdisc is what we find on the current Blu-ray, which is very interesting. However, that's not the end of the story, because for those of you who are also very knowledgeable of your Criterion Collection Laserdisc history, you will also realize that this film had actually been attempted at being released earlier in the Criterion Collection Laserdisc catalog. I had mentioned that the official release by Criterion of this on Laserdisc was on spine number 227, and this was from 1994. Well, in fact, Criterion had attempted to release this film earlier, in 1992, in fact. And so this is what is known as The Prince of Tides, spine number 159. And this is an earlier Laserdisc of this particular film. However, what had happened with this particular earlier Laserdisc edition was that this had been manufactured, had been pressed, and as you can see, it was in this package that was apparently ready to go and go on the market. But at some stage prior to the official release, as far as my understanding is concerned, this was not released. In other words, it was pulled from being released. So this was never officially released in the open market. There were some pressings, of course, made, and they are now very highly collector's items in the Criterion collection. I was very, very fortunate to get my hands on this particular Laserdisc of The Prince of Tides. Again, this is something that was never released. But it is an interesting point of comparison, because there are all of the supplements that you find on the official release of the Laserdisc can be found on this earlier non-released version. There are some interesting differences as well with respect to the audio commentary, with respect to certain of the supplemental materials. For instance, some of the deleted scenes and the alternate takes are in a slightly different order, and the chapter headings or the chapter listings as we find them in the inside part actually some of them are indicated incorrectly, and so there are a little bit of order typos with respect to the chapter indications for some of the supplements. as well as there are some interesting differences as well in terms of the credits, how certain names are credited, where they are credited as well. Also, the back, the essay is very different. It's by a different, it's a different essay entirely, penned by Joseph McBride here on this non-released version, whereas on the official release Criterion Laserdisc, the essay is in fact by Bruce Eder on the back, and this is the essay that we find in the now current Blu-ray fold-out. The essay is essentially identical. The Bruce Eder essay is essentially identical, but with one interesting difference, and I'll get to that in a second. So the point is that this film, The Prince of Tides, does have a very interesting and peculiar history with the Criterion collection going all the way back to the Laserdisc days, such that this was not only a prior Criterion Laserdisc title, but this was also a Laserdisc title that is considered by many Criterion collection enthusiasts to be one of the most collectible Criterion collection items ever. And so, but I'll try to get into some of the differences with the non-released Laserdisc and then the officially released Laserdisc and then now currently this new Blu-ray. So where do we begin with that? So first of all, we can start with the audio commentary track. Now, this Blu-ray includes an optional audio commentary track given by Barbra Streisand, who is the director, the producer, and also one of the stars. She's one of the actors in the film, one of the main actors, in fact. And so this is all her. This is all her audio commentary track from her perspective. And the Criterion Collection Blu-ray describes this audio track as being from 1991, but updated in 2019. So what does this mean? Okay, so I listened to the audio commentary track all the way through, and I've also listened to the audio commentary track, which is also available on the official Laserdisc, and then also on the non-released earlier Laserdisc. Let me point out, first of all, that the audio commentary tracks on these two Laserdiscs are almost identical. They're almost identical. There are a couple of places where the earlier non-released Laserdisc audio commentary track does have some little extra comments by Barbra Streisand that are noticeably absent on this particular official Laserdisc release. And so that's an interesting little detail. But for the most part, the audio commentary tracks between the two Laserdiscs, the non-released version and then the official release version, are more or less the same. Now, what about the new current Blu-ray audio commentary track? If we go to the official released Laserdisc, it is, in content anyway, more or less the same and in keeping with the earlier Laserdisc commentary track. In other words, this 1991 commentary track is based off of this earlier Laserdisc commentary track. So we get, for, I would say, again, I'm guessing, but I would say about 60 to 70%, maybe 60% of the audio commentary track is in fact the same commentary track that we found on the Laserdisc. In other words, it's the same words by Barbra Streisand being used, it's the same phrasing, it's the exact same timing, etc. So it's the exact same recording of that audio commentary track. About 60% of it is now used for the Blu-ray. But what about this remaining 30 to 40%? This is the interesting thing. I should point out that the audio commentary track is not the same. Okay, I just said that they were identical in terms of 60% or so. This is where it's a little bit confusing. This new audio commentary track is indicated as being updated for 2019, and I've listened to them both very carefully. Now, what this means is that on some of the audio commentary track, Barbra Streisand actually re-recorded part of the commentary in 2019. So when this means it's updated in 2019, what this actually means is that she went in and re-recorded part of the commentary track that ended up becoming the commentary track for the Blu-ray. So part of the track has new recorded comments by Barbra Streisand. Other parts of the commentary track have elements that were taken directly from the Laserdisc commentary track. Not all, because there are some places, for instance, where the commentary track here has some comments by Barbra Streisand, but they are silent here. So it's not 100% direct carryover of this full commentary track. It is maybe a good portion of it, but not the entirety of it. So you get part of this commentary track being used, new recordings by Barbra Streisand being then edited in to create this new commentary track for this Blu-ray release. And to make it even more interesting, for many of the parts that Barbra Streisand re-recorded for this new Blu-ray release, her comments are in many ways almost exactly the same as the corresponding parts of the earlier commentary track that we found on the Laserdisc. In other words, there might be a portion of this Laserdisc commentary track where Barbra Streisand in 1991 was giving her commentary comments. That portion was then re-recorded by Barbra Streisand and edited in strategically into this new commentary track for the new Blu-ray. But maybe her tone of voice might be different. Maybe her delivery of the commentary comment itself might be a little bit different. Maybe there might be some slight change in wording, perhaps. So it really depends on what you're talking about or what the particular comment is on the commentary track. For instance, there's one moment where she's talking about what Dr. Lowenstein is wearing in terms of the kinds of things that she has on her lapel and the kinds of things she has in her office, for instance, about how Barbra Streisand was into Greek, she calls it here Greek or Roman artifacts. Here in the new commentary track, for instance, Barbra Streisand in 2019 gives almost exactly the same comments as she did in the earlier 1991 commentary track, except that, for instance, for this example, she doesn't say Greek or Roman, she just says Greek. So there's a little bit of a, how should I put it, an alteration or slight modification of a comment that she made in the earlier 1991 commentary track, but the remainder of that particular section will be more or less the same, just recorded in 2019. There are other instances where she re-recorded her comments that she made earlier. She re-recorded them for purposes of this new commentary track. But her comments are almost exactly the same. The wording is the same. It's just her delivery is a little bit different. And so that is a very interesting choice. Now, I can't tell exactly why this is. For instance, in the parts of the commentary track of the Laserdisc that were then replaced by the 2019 update, I can't detect any flaw or fault in the recording or in the way that Barbra Streisand is describing the comment, etc., in the earlier commentary track. In other words, my ear cannot detect any clear reason why this kind of updating would be taking place for purposes of this 2020 Blu-ray release. I can only assume that maybe Barbra Streisand felt that it was more appropriate to re-record certain portions, not all, but certain portions of the commentary track and leave the rest intact as well. But again, you're getting, ultimately though, you're getting more or less the same commentary track, except there are some omissions. In other words, in the Blu-ray disc, there are, as I say, some places where it's silent on the commentary track, but on the earlier Laserdisc commentary, there would have been some comments. And so that's just an interesting fact about this new Blu-ray. I think it's very fascinating. If you are interested, of course, you can always find the Laserdisc copy, the official Laserdisc release. I think it's still pretty available on the used Laserdisc market. So anyone who's interested, I suggest hunting down one of these Laserdiscs and checking out the commentary track directly. Again, the substance is more or less the same, but if you are interested in a different presentation in many respects of the same content of commentary track, if you're interested, check out the Laserdisc. But anyway, that's the commentary track issue, or that's the commentary track situation with respect to this new Blu-ray. Again, a fascinating situation. But that is not all, because then we have, as part of the supplements, a section called Introduction, Visions and Versions. And what this is if you go into the supplements menu, and it's one of the choices, it's one of the first choices there, you click on it. It's not a video, but it's text. It is about 2 or 3 slides of text that you can just press and read the text. It basically presents the introduction to the entirety of the supplements. And this particular text is actually taken from the slides that were used to introduce the supplemental sections on this particular Laserdisc. And so the text is almost identical to the text that's used to introduce the supplemental sections here. Again, it's very fascinating stuff. Then the supplements on the Blu-ray continue on with a section called Pat Conroy, who is, of course, the author of the novel that became the source material for this film adaptation, of course. And when you click on this, you get 3 sections. First is a section called Conroy and Streisand. And what this is, if you click on it, there is a little bit of sort of video footage of Streisand and Pat Conroy. It's very short, but they're dancing, and the text is indicating that this is apparently some kind of maybe session that the two of them were having, and the jig was something to do with a dance that would be relied upon in one of the flashback sequences of the film. And then there is, over this, Barbra Streisand commentary about her working relationship with Pat Conroy in the context of making this film. So this is also borrowed, taken directly from the Laserdisc release. So this was a Laserdisc release supplement that we find now on the new Blu-ray. But that is not all when it comes to the supplements regarding Pat Conroy, because then we have a 6-minute supplement from 1992 called Conroy on Cinema Showcase. And this is a one-on-one direct interview with the author himself. And he talks about his reaction to the film, his views on working with Barbra Streisand. According to the interview, he had a very positive working relationship with her, and similar sorts of comments like that. So it's really nice to get a direct interview, even if it is only 6 minutes, from the author of the novel itself. So this is once again from 1992. And then the third supplement in this particular section of supplements is called Conroy Writes to Streisand. And what we have is we have 3 messages or letters that Pat Conroy himself wrote to Barbra Streisand. This is interesting. We have pictures of the actual written notes or letters. 2 of them are, or some of them are written in the inserts of a book. And then the third is an actual letter itself. And so we get pictures of those actual written letters. And then we get print text in that very now recognizable Criterion font, where we have the reproduction of the contents of those letters. And these are all, one is from April 24th, 1990, and the other is from April 30th, 1990, and the next, third and last, is from December 25th, 1991. And so once again, these are letters or messages written by Pat Conroy and addressed to Barbra Streisand. And so they talk about his glowing admiration for the film, and how much he respects Streisand as a filmmaker, and how he was very pleased with the film result. So again, this is under the section Pat Conroy. And then we have a section in the supplements which is called Pre-Production. And Pre-Production, oh, I'm sorry, I should say also that the Pat Conroy supplements that we saw, which is about Conroy on Cinema Showcase, and then the 3 letters, I cannot find those on this particular Laserdisc release. And so those 2 supplements that we found in the Pat Conroy section are unique to this new Blu-ray release. In other words, they aren't found or borrowed from the Laserdisc. I should point out here that I said that there is an almost 100% carryover of the Laserdisc materials to this Blu-ray, but there is a portion, a very small portion, that hasn't been carried over. One is a very short montage introduction to all the supplements. That hasn't been carried over. That's a very short introduction montage from this Laserdisc. And then the second supplement that hasn't been carried over is a sort of slideshow presentation of the script, the working script, with Barbra Streisand's handwritten notes as pictured in this slideshow. So as far as I can tell, that hasn't been carried over into the new Blu-ray. But and then in the reverse, as I say, the 6-minute interview with Pat Conroy and those 3 letters by Pat Conroy to Barbra Streisand aren't found on the earlier Laserdisc, as far as I can recall. So those are some differences, but the rest of the supplements, for the most part, will be exactly the same as the Laserdisc release. And what are those? Well, there is next on the Blu-ray a section called Pre-Production. And there are a number of subsections here. So the first section is called Children's Casting, and these are 8mm video of some of the children, video of them and the casting process. So we see close-ups of their faces as they're talking, and we see them, the video footage followed one after the other after the other. And this is actually taken from the Laserdisc as one of the supplements found on the Laserdisc. It's actually exactly the same as that. And then there's another one here called Rehearsal, Tom's Daughters, and these are 2 rehearsal scenes with the daughters that play the daughters of the Nick Nolte character, Tom. So these are the actors Maggie Collier, Lindsay Ray, and Brandolyn Whitaker. And we also find these video rehearsal footage from the earlier Laserdisc. And then we have a section called Rehearsal, Shrimp and Dog Food. Now what this is a sort of side-by-side sequencing. We have on one side we have the rehearsal footage of this particular flashback scene involving shrimp and dog food, and then next to that on the same screen, like a split screen, we have the actual version as it's shown on the film. So we have the rehearsal and then we have the film version itself. So you can alternate between the audio tracks by pushing on the audio button, and you can get the audio for the rehearsal or you can get the audio for the actual scene as it plays out in the film itself. This is an interesting presentation because the way that the supplements, many of the supplements are arranged on this particular Laserdisc are actually very similar to how this particular supplement appears on the Blu-ray. In other words, you'll often have on the same screen itself like smaller sub-screens or cutouts or like split screens, and then sometimes it'll be 2, sometimes it'll be 3, and then what you can do on the Laserdisc is you can just alternate the audio tracks in order, if you want to listen to this particular image, you can listen, you can press the audio button and you can listen to this audio track and listen to this video. If you want to listen to this, you can press the audio button and then you can change the audio track to listen to this particular footage, or then this particular footage. And so this arrangement by Criterion on the Laserdisc is mimicked very interestingly when we come to this rehearsal shrimp and dog food section on the Laserdisc. So again, that's a very interesting presentation, so if you're interested, please check it out. And then we have another, which is called Rehearsal, Leaving Eddie's Party. So this is, first of all, just some video footage rehearsal, and then after that, we have interview clips, very short, but one is with Barbra Streisand and then the other is with Nick Nolte. And so this is again from the Laserdisc release that we saw from Criterion many years ago. And then after that we have Rehearsal, Manhattan Dinner Party. So we have a section where we see the actor Erwin Krabbe practicing his violin fingering, because there's some scenes where he has to be playing the violin because that's part of his character. And then following that we have video footage of Barbra Streisand working with the room, trying to arrange or rehearse certain movements and certain aspects of this particular dinner scene. And then we have Streisand costume and makeup test with comments by Streisand that are recorded over. So we have interesting indications of Streisand's makeup, and also and I think in particular her costume as the character of Dr. Lowenstein. And then we have her comments recorded over. Again, this is also borrowed from the Laserdisc. And then we have another section which is called Nelligan Costume Makeup Test. And this is a kind of a section where we have the actor Kate Nelligan, who plays a very key role. We see her in makeup, and there's a certain makeup test that's being applied. And as the makeup test is being applied to her, we hear her comments, and then we hear those of Barbra Streisand as well, talking about how appropriate or inappropriate this particular makeup would be for the final film. And so that's what we get here. This is more or less the same as what we saw on the earlier Laserdisc, except that the Laserdisc then included the option of being able to see side by side the actual scene from the film where we see Kate Nelligan in old age makeup as she appears in the final film. And we can see the comparison as to this makeup test versus how she really looked under what ended up being used as the final makeup appliance for the film. So it's an interesting contrast. We don't get that option in the Blu-ray as far as I recall. So, but if you want to get the feel for what actually her makeup was versus how it compared to the makeup test, you're going to have to go to the actual film itself and find one of the scenes where she appears in this makeup. So that is the pre-production section of the supplements. Then we go into what is known as the production part of the supplements, and we start with we have a number of subsections here, the first of which is called Siblings Underwater, and when we press on this we get two further subsections. One is titled Location Footage, Beaufort, South Carolina, and the other is Video Tap Footage. So the first of these, which is called Location Footage, this is actually location footage that is involving 3 young children who appear in certain flashback parts of the film, and they are outside, in a certain location involving the water and a sort of a dock. And so we see some location footage, some of the crew getting ready for the shot, and Barbra Streisand behind the camera. So this is very interesting. This is also borrowed from the Laserdisc, the official release Laserdisc, entirely. So it's a direct porting over from the Laserdisc. I should point out here, as an interesting contrast, remember this non-released version? There's the same supplement exists, except that there is a little bit extra that we get in the footage that is available on the non-release version than what is available on the Blu-ray. There's a little bit extra in the beginning, maybe I would say about 15-20 seconds, that are included on the non-official release version that we don't get in the official Laserdisc or this new current Blu-ray. And I can't see any reason why, except maybe it was seen to be superfluous or unnecessary. We see a lot of crew members standing around drinking cans of soda, so maybe that has something to do with it. It wasn't necessarily showing the actual activity of the filmmaking process per se, although I still think that it is a very interesting glimpse into location footage. But I don't think we lose anything in particular when we rely on the slightly shorter version of this location footage as we find it on the Blu-ray versus how we could have found it on this particular Laserdisc that ended up not being released. So that's an interesting thing. And then the second subsection in this Siblings Underwater part of the production section of the supplements is called Video Tap Footage, and this is sort of a camera tap footage that is also relying upon comparisons with storyboards to see how a certain underwater sequence was developed. And so I think this is an interesting look into the way in which the camera and storyboards are relied upon for a particular sequence that involves a lot of technical aspects. So again, very interesting stuff. Once again, also borrowed from the Laserdisc. And then we have a subsection called Making Music. And this has two sort of subsections within this particular section as well. So one is a sort of a studio look, a very short, brief studio look at the musician Pinchas Zuckerman, who provides a lot of the violin music that is relied upon very significantly in this film. And so we get footage of the musician and practicing in the studio, and then Barbra Streisand from the recording part of the studio, maybe talking, interacting with the musician as well as being in the studio. So this is very interesting. And then we have another subsection, which is of Jason Gould, the actor Jason Gould, who plays a very key role in this film. And there's a scene involving Grand Central Station, in New York City. And so there's a little bit of background or behind-the-scenes footage involving this particular scene. So this is very interesting. I should note that these two subsections are exactly as we found them on the earlier official release Laserdisc by Criterion. However, the Zuckerman violinist footage is different if we go to the non-released Criterion Laserdisc, which is very, very interesting. In this particular non-release version, we get the same, it feels like the same session, but it's just a different part of the session. We get a different piece of music that is being played by the musician on violin in the studio versus what we actually get on this Blu-ray. And on the Blu-ray, if you notice, there's some interaction between Barbra Streisand and the musician. There's an interesting moment where she says, I'm paraphrasing, but what, was that note that was a mistake? Was that also intentional or something like that? And so we don't get that kind of interaction from Barbra Streisand in the footage that we find on this non-released version that otherwise corresponds to the exact same supplement. And so that's an interesting change when we think of a change from the non-release version to the release version on Laserdisc to now this release version on Blu-ray, just for anyone who's interested. Okay, then we have a section called Alternate Scenes, and this has 4 little parts to it. So we have the first 3 parts being alternate scenes. One is called Village Walk, and it's called short version. And then the next is called Tom and Lowenstein at the Cabin, also short version. And then we have Tom and Savannah at the Seaport, long version. Let me stop there. So these are alternate takes of scenes that ended up in the film, and for a lot of these scenes we'll get explanations from Barbra Streisand herself on the commentary track as to why the shorter versions or the longer versions that were ended up used for the final film, why they were chosen over these alternate versions of the same scenes. But you still get the alternate versions, and again it adds certain dimension to the characters. In particular, I should point out the Tom and Savannah at the Seaport long version. There's some interesting dynamic between the siblings, and if you know the story, you know that there is a very significant aspect to the sibling relationships, plural relationships, and so that is brought out much more significantly in this alternate scene long version, Tom and Savannah at the Seaport. So just in case you're interested, you can check that out. But that's not all to the alternate scenes version. There's also a 4th subsection here which is called alternate endings, and these are alternate endings of the film itself, because according to Barbra Streisand there were different ways in which she could have ended the film, and the way this is presented is also very interesting. If you look at the section, it's actually presenting these alternate endings not in full screen, but in fact in these little squares about this size, here and then here and then here, or starting on screen left and then middle and then screen right. And these are kind of small squares, and one might think, why are these presented in these small squares like this? Well, I think the reason is that in the Laserdisc, this is actually the same presentation that we had on the Laserdisc. In other words, this alternate ending section is the same which is found on the Laserdisc, except that the Laserdisc also had the sections playing on these small squares rather than in a full screen format. So this is in a way mimicking or reproducing this small formatted screen size for each of the endings that's being presented, with one subtle difference. For the Laserdisc, all of the screenshots of the different endings were playing simultaneously, and so therefore you could change from version to version to version just by pushing on the audio button, and that would change from one audio version to another audio version to another audio version. So all of them would be playing simultaneously, but you'd be focusing in on one because the audio would be just from that version. And then if you wanted to focus on the next alternate ending, you just push the audio button and it will change to the audio track for the middle square, and then you could focus in on that even though the other squares are still playing simultaneously. Here in the Blu-ray, it's got this alternate thing, so you just have one square that appears and the rest of the screen is black, and then you have the next square that appears and plays, but then the rest of the screen is black. So it's an alternating rather than a simultaneous play of all the endings at the same time. So that's an interesting thing. But in terms of the formatting size itself, this is how it appeared in the earlier Laserdiscs. So for anyone who's interested as to why this is being presented this way, I think that's the reason. And then to round out this production section, there is a photo album, which is a slideshow of various photos taken from the production, the shoot of the film, plus a number of photos at the gala event premiere of this particular film as well. I should point out that this is there is a photo album section on the Laserdisc as well, and most of the photos are the same, although I should point out that the Laserdisc has them in a different order. And I think there are a little bit more photos. I could be mistaken. I haven't necessarily gone through each of the photos yet, but I think there are a little bit more photos available on the new Blu-ray than there were necessarily made available on the photo album section of the Laserdisc. So the photos themselves are in different order as they're presented in the slideshow, and also I think, I could be wrong, but I think there are a little bit more photos on the new Blu-ray. So again, for your information, that's the photo album section of this Blu-ray. But that's not all, because then we get to the section of the supplement which is called post-production. And the first subsection we find here is called deleted scenes. Now we have here 6 deleted scenes. And so we have one which is called Tom Remembers Luke. Next is Tom and Savannah at the hospital. Next is Tom confronts Henry. Next, Tom sends flowers to Lowenstein. Next, Lila is ridiculed. And last, love montage. And as I say, there are 6 of these, and these are scenes that were deleted, and many of which you can find explanations or descriptions on the commentary track by Barbra Streisand herself. I should point out that these were taken directly from the officially released Laserdisc of this film by Criterion, so and the order is the same, so that's an interesting thing. I should point out, for anyone who's interested, that one of the differences between the official release by Criterion on Laserdisc and the non-released version by Criterion on Laserdisc is that these deleted scenes, while the contents are the same, the order is a little bit different. And the difference in order contributes, I think, to some errors that we find in the chapter headings with respect to the supplement section that we find on the non-release version. These are corrected for purposes of the release version on Laserdisc, and the order, therefore, is changed to account for these changes in the chapter heading order. And this order is subsequently preserved for purposes of the Blu-ray. So in case anyone is interested in that. Then we have a section which is called Alternate End Credits with Vocal. Now, as some of you may know, there are the end credits to this film, and there was an option, or there was the consideration of having a song placed over this particular end credit section. And this alternate wasn't eventually what was that didn't ended up being the final film version, of course, but what we do have is the alternate. And so if you're interested in what could have been, you have this this particular option that you can listen to. The song is Places That Belong to You, performed by Barbra Streisand, and you can listen to this alternate end credits section on the Blu-ray. Plus, if you want, there's an optional commentary track made by Streisand herself, talking about her reasons why she ended up going with the ending version that she ended up going with. And I should point out that this is also taken from the Laserdisc release. So this is something that we find on the Laserdisc release that is now carried over to this new Blu-ray, including the commentary track, by the way. Next, there is it's a recording of a test screening. And this is a test screening with respect to how the film played at a certain test screening, and as a result of how it played, Barbra Streisand decided to make a few alterations with respect to one particular scene in particular, and this is the shrimp and dog food flashback scene. So we get an actual recording of a test screening, we hear the reaction from the audience, and then we also get Barbra Streisand's voiceover commentary as to why she ended up making the artistic decisions that she did based off of the reaction of the audience at this test screening. So this is an interesting little bit of information and insight as to how she works as an artist and a filmmaker. Once again, this is borrowed directly from the Laserdisc. In other words, this was a supplement that we found on the earlier Laserdisc. And then we have what's known as a gag reel, which is basically a sort of blooper outtakes of not all, but just a number of scenes. It's very short. It's maybe about 2-3 minutes or so. And so not a lot of blooper outtakes, but some. And again, this is something that we also find directly taken from the earlier Laserdisc. Then we have another section of the supplements, which is called Barbra Streisand Interviews. Now, this part of the Blu-ray supplements is stuff that we didn't get in the earlier Laserdisc. And so this means that these are new and exclusive to this particular Blu-ray. So this is very interesting. One is an interview, a one-on-one interview on the program Aspel and Company from February 22nd, 1992. And this is about 35 minutes. And here she's talking about The Prince of Tides. She's also talking about her film career, in particular Yentl. And she's also talking about her career in general, some rumors about her and her public life and private life, etc., that are brought up. And so we see her engaging one-on-one with the interviewer. And so it's very interesting to see how she is trying to sort of explain her thinking, her philosophy as a filmmaker with respect to this film and other parts of her career and her life. And then we have a second interview supplement, which is called The Director's Chair, and this is from November 26th, 2018. So this is a much more recent interview. This is a one-on-one interview, about 11 minutes, with Robert Rodriguez. And this is very, very interesting because here, Barbra Streisand is very vocal about this, what might be described as being certain challenges that she faced according to her assessment of the situation. Certain challenges that she faced with respect to shooting this particular film, The Prince of Tides, at least when compared to the more, the smoother production process that she had with respect to the shooting of the film Yentl, for example. It's very interesting to hear her comments about the difficulties that she had in terms of filming certain scenes, about certain actors that she was working with. So please check this out if you're interested. Again, very interesting. I point this out because let's return to the commentary track. So remember, this Blu-ray has a commentary track which is kind of based off of the 1991 commentary track, which is found on the Laserdisc, but there are other parts which are updated or re-recorded. So we have a kind of a mix of the older commentary track and a newly recorded commentary track mixed into one. One of the things that happened as a result of this new mix of an audio commentary track is that some of the comments that are found on the earlier audio commentary track were not included in this Blu-ray commentary track. One of those things that was left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, was that on the earlier Laserdisc commentary track, there was a section at the very end where she's talking very candidly about working in Hollywood as a female director. And not only female director, but also as a producer, director, and star of the film, and how she feels that there are certain difficulties that were placed upon her being a female director in Hollywood at this particular point in time. And it's very interesting because while there are comments on the earlier Laserdisc track, commentary track, that speak to this by Streisand herself, and again, they're very interesting, very candid, those comments are not included on the audio commentary track, at least as far as I recall, that was here and that was updated for 2019. Very interesting. But a similar line of comments can be found on the Blu-ray interview, or the Blu-ray that includes the interview with Robert Rodriguez. In other words, the Robert Rodriguez interview has Barbra Streisand giving comments that aren't necessarily included on the Blu-ray audio commentary track, but were included on the Laserdisc commentary track. Very interesting. And incidentally, in case you're interested, with this particular part of the Laserdisc commentary track, there is one small but significant change. it's the same comments that we find on the non-released commentary, non-released Laserdisc commentary track, except there's one change. In the non-released version, she actually mentions a few examples of male filmmakers that were also noted directors and producers and stars. Here, in the Laserdisc commentary track, that comment is without the reference to specific names of producer directors, but rather just men in Hollywood. That's the change of the comment, which is very interesting. But again, it's not included on the Blu-ray commentary track, but it is included on the Robert Rodriguez interview, which is part of the Blu-ray and not part of the earlier Laserdiscs. So again, very, very interesting. And it's also very important because this is something that we must keep in mind if we are trying to remember not just the film on its merits and the artistic and the artistic points of the film itself, but I think it's also very significant to keep in mind certain production details, behind-the-scenes details, according to Barbra Streisand herself, and also just remembering that this is a film from the early 1990s. So again, this is, I think, very significant comments to make, and so I'm glad that they are included in some form or another for this final Blu-ray from Criterion. So that's the second of two interviews with Barbra Streisand. And then to round out the supplements, we have a featurette, which is about 6 minutes, and this is a kind of montage featurette, sort of short making of promo featurette. This is also found on the Laserdisc, so this is a direct carryover from the Laserdisc. Then we have two trailers, a teaser trailer and a theatrical trailer, and again, these two are carried over from the earlier Laserdisc. Finally, we have the insert, which is again taken from the Blu-ray. So the Blu-ray is here with the back here, and then if you open it up, you can get the insert. Now the insert is this fold out. It's not a staple booklet, unfortunately, but it's a fold out. But still, it's really good because it has nice pictures and it has information about the credits of the Blu-ray, and then the cast and crew, of course. And then we have the essay. The essay is called The Artist's Mirror by Bruce Eder. Now this is very significant because this essay by Bruce Eder is actually the essay that appears on the back of the official Laserdisc release by Criterion in '94. So we have the Bruce Eder essay here. At this time, but the Laserdisc, it was never given any title, so it's given a title now in the Blu-ray insert, which is called The Artist's Mirror. I've checked it out, and by my understanding, it is almost entirely identical to in other words, the essay that we find with the Blu-ray is almost entirely identical to that which we found on the back of this official release Laserdisc. The one difference is there is one additional parenthetical that is added to the fourth paragraph, the end of the fourth paragraph. That paragraph starts with the phrase compounding the challenge, which is right here. It's right here. So compounding the challenge. At the end of such paragraph, there's a parenthetical which says, in fact, this was not the first time Streisand had taken on such a task. With Yentl, she had become the first woman to write, produce, direct, and star in a contemporary Hollywood film. And by my observation, I can see that there is no such parenthetical that can be found in the essay as it appeared in the back of this official release Laserdisc. So that is very interesting. Incidentally, in case you're interested, one of the differences between the non-release Laserdisc and then the official release Laserdisc is that the essay is different. The essay on the non-release Laserdisc is by Joseph McBride, and it's a very different trajectory in terms of a description of Barbra Streisand's career up to Prince of Tides and then her work on the Prince of Tides. So that is one of the differences. But again, ultimately, the Bruce Eder essay was the one that was used for the final official release back in the day, and now we see it emerge again here for the Blu-ray. Once again, the essay is called The Artist's Mirror by Bruce Eder. So this is my roundabout way of trying to describe this particular release, and I hope my comments made it clear that I think this is really quite a fascinating chapter in the history of the Criterion Collection releases. And the fact that this is being released now on Blu-ray is yet a further reminder and indication of that in my eyes. So this film I see, of course, as a release of a film directed by Barbra Streisand, which is, I think, a very significant part of her career as a film director. Very, very obviously. It is also very significant in terms of the acting career of Nick Nolte and many others. Another adaptation on the screen of a Pat Conroy novel, etc., and a mix of a Hollywood drama and also a very surprising character study woven into this particular work. So I think there's a lot going for it in this particular film as a film itself. And as a Criterion release, it is also very, very interesting. There are many details that I tried to explain in this particular video, talking about the various Laserdisc incarnations of this, as well as how those Laserdiscs now are living once again in the form of this Blu-ray, but with a few interesting little footnotes along the way. And I think one of the most interesting ones is the commentary track, which we find on the Blu-ray. Again, a fascinating way into the production of a particular release by the Criterion Collection. And therefore, I think this title is very significant in many respects when we're talking about the Criterion Collection. So this is spine number 1022 of the film by Barbra Streisand that is called The Prince of Tides. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you once again so much, my dear friends, so much for your very precious time. Please continue to be well, and cheers.